What I'd like to discuss with you today is the question of Nashim and Tzitzis. Since we've been discussing the principle of Rabbeinu Tam, that Esei Do Chalosas could apply even in the case of a woman wearing Kilayim B'tzitzis, let's talk about the Sugya in Menachos. And if you have the page, Steve, we're on the bottom of page Chaf Beis, which I'm pretty sure you have, on the bottom left column. And there's Machlokes Tanoim in Masechet Menachos Adaf Mem Gimel about women and tzitzis. According to Rav Shimon, tzitzis is a classic mitzvah seishas man groma because Laila loves man tzitzisu, and therefore women are exempt. The Chachamim disagree; they hold Laila's man tzitzis, and tzitzis is a 24/7 mitzvah, and therefore women are obligated. So Tosfos there in Masechet Menachos asks the following: why don't we derive from Smichus HaParshiyos that women should be chayav in tzitzis? Since the first pasuk says Kilayim, these are Kilayim, the next pasuk immediately following is Gevilim Taskel, the mitzvah of tzitzis. We should therefore say that the mitzvah of tzitzis is expanding, and what it's telling you is that women should be, just one second, right? That Tosfos is asking that from the Smichus of Parshas, we should derive that women, just like they're included in Isa Kilayim, they're included in the mitzvah of tzitzis. Meaning that the first pasuk, which is Kilayim, is now coming to shed a light on the second pasuk, which is Gedilim Taskel mitzvah tzitzis, and expanding the application of the mitzvah of tzitzis. That's Tosfos' cap. Tosfos answers that the Gemara has a drasha there in Masechet Menachos based on a hekesh between tefillin and tzitzis, that just like women are exempt from tefillin because the Torah says L'maniyah Torah Hashem Elkech Beficha, women are exempt from Talmud Torah, so too by equation they're exempt from tzitzis. And Tosfos postulates there that hekesh adif mi smuch, which means that in the hierarchy, if there's a contradiction between smuchen and another method of derivation, another drasha, like for example, yesterday we had a discussion about a contradiction between Zeret Shava and smuchen, then smuchen loses out. Here also we have a drasha which is called a hekesh. Hekesh is very powerful, and it teaches us that women are exempt from tefillin, they're therefore likewise exempt from tzitzis. That trumps the smuchen that would have expanded women in tzitzis to include them because they're included in the law of Kilayim. Now, there are a bunch of Tanoim who say that tefillin is not a mitzvah seishas man groma, and that means that tefillin applies even b'layla, even on Shabbos, and we disregard the pasuk of Talmud Torah because we assume that women are also included in Talmud Torah to some extent, and therefore women are obligated in tefillin. So that tefillin is not a mitzvah seishas man groma if you hold that tefillin is obligatory even at night and even on Shabbos. And according to those Tanoim, women are obligated in tefillin. And if that be the case, then why should women be exempt from tzitzis? Meaning, we have the shita of those Tanoim that hold, like Rabbi Shimon, that women are exempt from tzitzis, and that exemption cannot be derived from tefillin if you hold that tefillin is not a mitzvah seishas man groma, meaning if tefillin is obligatory both by day and night. So what's the basis for exempting women from tzitzis? And then you're going to have to come to the conclusion that women are exempt from tzitzis because it's a mitzvah seishas man groma. and there's no chiyuv of tzitzis at night because the Torah says urisam also, we're not going to derive the ptur of nashim b'tzitzis, according to Rabbi, from a hekesh to tefillin, if I hold that women are included in tefillin, but they'll be exempt from tzitzis based on zman grum. And now the question is, well, we have the smichos haparshios, which tells us that if women are included in the Isser Kalayim, they should be therefore included in Gedilim Tassel. And now we have a different kind of a collision between the halacha and the principle of Zman Grum and Nashim Pturos and the rule of Smichos HaParsha. So there are two roads, two possible methods of explaining Reb Shimon Shita that women are exempt from tzitzis. One is the hekesh to tefillin, and that's under the premise that women are exempt from tefillin. And the other is based on the general rule of Zman Groma, and we assume that tzitzis balayla is pot. And in both cases, we're going to override the smichos aparshios and the drush of smuchim, which could have easily have put women back into the obligation of tzitzis. Now we have another sugya to look at, and that's the sugya in Kiddushin on Daf Lamed Gimel. And there, once again, the Rishonim talk about the obligation or the exemption of women from tzitzis. And the Ramban, there in his commentary on Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Gimel, asks the same identical question as Tosas and Menachos. Why shouldn't we obligate women in tzitzis based on the smuchin to kelayim? But the Ramban goes a step further. He says the following, that in the case of the mitzvah of matzah, women are obligated in the mitzvah of matzah because the mitzvah of matzah is written right after the Isser Chametz, the Isser Achilas Chametz. And therefore, the Gemara Pesachim Mem Gimel derives that Kol Sheyechno B'Bal Tochal Chametz Yeshno B'Kum Echol Matzah. So women are obligated in matzah. This, despite the fact that matzah is a mitzvah Saseish Zman Groma because of the equation to the Yitzer Lav of Chametz. And the Ramban thinks that we have a parallel structure here regarding tzitzis, that since women are included in Kalayim, then they should be included in tzitzis. What are you going to answer that? Well, tzitzis is man grama. That seems to be irrelevant because matzah is also man grama, and yet we apply the hekesh of kol sheyeshno b'bal tochal chametz, yeshno b'kum achol matzah. Here we should say kol sheyeshno b'isa levishas b'bal tilbash Kalayim, yeshno b'kum aseh of tzitzis. And to my knowledge, I don't know, I might be wrong, the Ramban does not offer an answer to this question. And the answers come from different sources, but they're all achronim. He has here a Shara Melech, an Orach Laner. He's got a sefer called Yashresh Yaakov. It's like a whole list of achronim. He says the following in the name of the Yashresh Yaakov. The drush of smuchim will not override mitzvah seishas man grama, but the hekesh will. What do I mean? Says the Yashresh Yaakov, what's the difference between the hekesh and smuchim? Hekesh means that they were both written in the exact same pasuk. So the Torah says, "Shivas yom lo tochu chametz," and it says "Shivas yom matz tochelu." If it's all in one pasuk, that's not smuchim. That's a hekesh. Kol sheyeshno b'al tochal chametz, yeshno b'kum achol matz. But in the case of Kalayim and Tzitzis, they're two separate psukim. One pasuk says Gedil, one pasuk says Lo Tilba Shatnes, and the other pasuk says Gedilin Tasel. In that case, we don't have a hekesh. What we have is smucha. And he says that a hekesh is more powerful than smucha, as we saw already in Dotzim Menachos. And therefore, women are obligated in matzah by virtue of the hekesh, and that's going to trump the normal, shall we say, universal principle of zman groma. But they're not going to be chayiv in tzitzis, because there we're going to topple smuchim by virtue of the universal halacha of zman groma. So zman groma cannot override a hekesh, but it could override smuchim. That's the thesis of the Ashrish Yaakov. Now the question is, does that in any way impact on tefillin? It says the following: Al kain yesh bekocho lahotzi me'ahekesh shehukshu hamitzvos l'tefillin is kain me'ahekesh l'tefillin b'shar mitzvos chutz mi matzah. He says the following, that we have a hekesh that's a general hekesh, and that's tefillin to all mitzvahs. And that means that just like tefillin is zman groma, according to that man Yomar, Laila zman tefillin, and women are exempt, so too women are exempt from all mitzvahs. Now, with regard to matzah, which is the zman groma, you want to apply the hekesh that just like tefillin, women are exempt, so too women should be exempt from matzah. And here, we're going to apply the hekesh. Now, why is one hekesh superior to the other hekesh? The answer is because one hekesh is general and the other hekesh is specific. And what we're going to say is, based on the hekesh between matzah and bal tochal chametz, we're going to whittle down the application of the hekesh of tefillin to shar mitzvahs Torah, and we're going to remove tzitzis from the bag. And that's not a problem, because the hekesh will still teach me all other mitzvahs. And the exception to that rule will be the case of matzah, because of the unique, specific hekesh between bal tochal chametz and kumechol matzah. But tzitzis is not a hekesh, because tzitzis you don't find in the same pasuk as kilayim, you find it in the next pasuk. Therefore, all you have is smichus and not hekesh. And ein bekoach smichus lahotzi behekesh. Since we have a hekesh, albeit a general hekesh between tefillin and all the mitzvahs associated with grama, that women are parted from tefillin, and therefore it's a factor they're parted from all of the mitzvahs associated with we're going to include tzitzis in that hekesh, because hekesh, at the end of the day, is stronger and overpowers smuchim. But in the case of matzah, where we have not smuchim but a hekesh, and that's higher on your hierarchy than smuchim, now you can put the hekesh of matzah to bal tochal chametz on the same level as the hekesh to tefillin, and when they fight it out, we're going to just simply exclude matzah from the general hekesh of tefillin. Now he has another answer to the question. He says that the hekesh between matzah and chametz has nothing to teach us. It's an empty set other than one member. It only has one member in the set. And what is that? That is that women are obligated in matzah. But the hekesh between tzitzis and kilayim, we need to be matzah kilayim b'tzitzis. So therefore, once we need the hekesh for that, we're not going to derive a chiyuv nashim b'tzitzis from the very. I'm sorry. Once we need the smuchin, I meant to say. Let me be careful then. Once we need the smuchin to teach me that there's no isa kilayim b'tzitzis, then we go back to the general rule that women, under the law of the hekesh of tefillin of mitzvah seishes grama, are exempt from tzitzis. we're not going to remove the application of that principle to the case of Noshim B'tzitzis because of the Smuchim. Why? Because we can use the Smuchim for something else. But in the case of the Hekesh between Lo Tochal Chametz and Kumachal Matzah, if you remove that Hekesh, then it's meaningless, meaning it's an empty set. It doesn't teach you anything at all. So again, we're setting up rules and regulations here. We're saying that if we can use the smuchin in some way, it'll come to express itself in some halacha, then we'd rather not use smuchin to override a general principle that's derived from a hekesh. And here lies the difference between the case of matzah, the case of tzitzis. In the case of matzah, we have no other use for this hekesh between baltocha chametz and kumachol matzah other than the chiyuv of noshim b'matzah. But in the case of the smuchim between kilayim and tzitzis, we have a very important halacha that we derive from that smuchim, namely that you can put, tcheles, which is wool, onto a beged shel pishtan, and you're allowed to override kilayim for the sake of the mitzvah tzitzis. And finally, the last answer here that he offers is that hekesh matzah l'chametz is adif. It's more powerful than the hekesh between tzitzis and kilayim. Why? I mean, again, you have two different hekeshim here. Why is one better than the other? And we gave the answer because the hekesh of matzah to chametz is exclusive to teach me that halacha alone, as opposed to tzitzis to kilayim. But now he's offering another answer. Lefisha chametz u'matzah noagim bizman echad vilu tzitzis tzitzis aseish zman grama u'kilayim ein zman grama. Meaning, there's an exact overlap, perfect overlap between the Isur chametz and the mitzvah matzah. Whereas in the case of kilayim and tzitzis, tzitzis is a mitzvah that only applies during the day. Kilayim is an Isur that applies both by day and night. So there's no perfect match. And that puts it on a lower level, so that the smichas haparshu is not, if you gave grades, you'd give 100 to the case of matzah and chametz, because they're in time, they're exactly equivalent. Give a lower grade to the smuchin of kilayim. Now, women are exempt from tzitzis, and can we be matir them in kilayim? So remember this tosus that we had in the past, that within the context of the smichus between tzitzis and kilayim, could have derived the conclusion shekol she'eno chayv b'tzitzis, eno osur b'kilayim, and women would be completely excluded from kilayim. And the Gemara in Beitza says that women are osur b'kilayim. So Tosas answers that there must be some ribui, which he doesn't know where it is, to include women in the Isur kilayim. That's Tosas here. But Tosas in Erechin gives a different answer. That the reason why women are included in kilayim is because women are included in all lotases. And hishva kasav isha leish lechol onshim shevato. Okay. Now, the Gemara had established here on Daf Daled that even though Rabbi Yehuda does not darshan smuchin and kol Torah kula, he does accept smuchin in Mishnah Torah. Why is that so? The Gemara's language is afilu mandlo darsh smuchin bi'alma b'Mishnah Torah darsh. So one approach is the following. Kivlahu l'chachamim sheb'Mishnah Torah kol smichus every smichus in Mishnah Torah is deliberate, what we call muchachas. And we'll see exactly why that's so. That's why is it that when the Torah was written, in Mishnah Torah, there was a more deliberate effort to place one pasuk next to the other pasuk to teach me something. Whereas in the other four Chumashim, that's not so. So here in the Masechet on page Chav Daled, he quotes the Ravan, one of the Balei Tosos. The Ravan writes, "Shebechol Torah came to be Pia Gvura Nemra." Moshe Rabbeinu was just a scribe, listening to the dictation, if you will, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Knowing HaKlal, ein mukdam u'mi'uchar b'Torah. We have a principle that you can never know for sure that the sequence of the psukim is deliberate. Ach b'Mishneh Torah, sheMoshe mipi atzmo amro, that's a little bit tricky, I'll come back to that in a minute, is sidro beparsha achar parsha, or you could say pasuk achar pasuk. This was all deliberate b'mechuvan kidei lidrosh smuchim. Now, this Ravan, I believe, is shedding a light on what we asked before. We said that in Mishnah Torah, smichus was deliberate. It's muchach. Why is that so? And the answer is, says the Ravan, because when Moshe Rabbeinu presented his nevuah, all his prophecies, he did so in a definite sequence. I just want to point out, it's a little bit misleading here. You know, I get a little cold feet when I read the Ravan saying that in Mishnah Torah, Moshe Kosvo Mipi Atzma. I mean, that's, you know, if you take that as face value, that's wrong. I mean, it's not that Moshe wrote it Mipi Atzma. It means that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated Torah's, Mishnah Torah, meaning Sefer Dvarim, to Moshe Rabbeinu, his dictation was a reflection of Moshe Rabbeinu's own nevuah. So in other words, the initiative was that, or the choice of words and formulations and expressions was that of Moshe Rabbeinu. But that doesn't make it Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu expressing his nevuah is like any Novi who expresses nevuah. What upgrades Moshe's nevuah to the status of Torah? It's the dictation. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictates to Moshe to write Sefer Dvarim, as he did with all the other four. But the only difference is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the dictation used the initial initiative or formulation of Moshe. Now again, that was the Ravan. Now he quotes what I call Chachmei Sfarad, the Ramban, the Ritva, and the Meiri quotes this. Ein hasmichu shebechol haTorah mufrachas mishum shein mukta mucha b'Torah. Val im hayam mufnes harei nidreshes af bechol haTorah. So we have something called mufnes. Mufnes means that it's absolutely redundant. It's unnecessary. So if the Torah adds something that we already know elsewhere, or we derive it from Svara, that's called mufnes. And then even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that smuchin, when it's classified as mufnes, is the basis for a valid drasha derivation, even with regard to the other four books of Moses. But then they go on. They say the following: L'das chachamim hadorshin smuchim b'chol haTorah. We said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the first four books, he concedes that we accept smuchin as a drasha because of the principle of mufnes. So when mufnes applies, and we have a kasha, why did the Torah bother repeating itself? Then the answer could be smuchin. According to Rabbanan, on the other hand, we don't need mufnes in order to darshan smuchin. We don't need muchachas. We don't need any proof the smichus itself, even in Bereshis, Shmos, Vayikra, and Bamidbar, is valid as a drasha unto itself. How do they know that? Let's take the case of Lotachsam Shar B'Disho, and immediately afterwards the Torah gives the command of Yibum. Ain't shum yitur klal. There are no extra words at all, not in Yibum and not in the Lava Lotachsam. And ain't a mufna, it's not redundant or repetitive, mishum tzad. In other words, you can't ask any kasha on the pasuk. Why did the Torah have to formulate the mitzvah of Yibum? It could have relied on some other parsha in the Torah. There is no other parsha. This is the mitzvah of Yibum, and it was placed after the lav lotachson. There's nothing redundant. There's no logical proof other than darshanik smuchim. And that's why the Gemara assumes that Rabbi Yehuda would not accept this drush of smuchim. The Chachamim accept smuchim, and therefore, I'm talking in Shara Torah, other than Mishnah Torah. Chachamim accept smuchim, and you don't need mufna or muchach. You don't have to have any kasha on the pasuk. It's redundant. We know it here. We know it there. So any requirement of mufna or muchach is going to be a liba de Rabbi Yehuda in Shara Torah. Now the Ritva says something else. Kilayim v'tzitzis shining. It could be that even the Chachamim will concede to Rabbi Yehuda that the smuchin of kilayim b'tzitzis has to be mufnis. Now this is strange because now we're in Sefer Dvarim. We said in Sefer Dvarim even Rabbi Yehuda accepts smuchin. So why is the Ritva insisting that in kilayim b'tzitzis everybody needs mufnits? So he answers, shiny tzitzis, kilayim b'tzitzis is different. From the fact that the Torah says, Lotachsam Shar B'Disha, and immediately obligates the mitzvah of Yibum, right? We'll read the pasuk says, this is now the paradigmic case of smuchim. And therefore, says the Ritva, you have to have some basis. But what's the Ritva saying? Since we're deriving from Hebrew, the principle of smuchim, I thought I understood this, but I see I don't really understand it. Because if the Ritva is saying that in order for Chazal to derive the principle of Darshin and Smuchin, we need this case of Yevamot, and it must be a case of Mufnes. So I don't get it. So how are you going to derive from here that Smuchin does not require Mufnes? Meaning, we have a principle called Dialav and Adilios Kinod. So if Smuchin is derived from a case of Mufnes, then how do you know that you have license to derive conclusions in halacha from Smuchin when it's not Mufnes? That I don't catch. Ritva somehow is captain with this, that the general concept of smuchin we're going to derive from this case. We're going to need a proof that we can derive it, and that's going to be the mufnes. But somehow we're going to extrapolate from that smuchin that smuchin in general does not require mufnes.
That case, why is that case?
It doesn't say. It just says they came on. He says in Kelayim B'tzitzis L'divrei Hakol Tzricha Lios Mufnes O Muchrachas. Became in Shekan Anu L'Meidin L'Chol Torah. Unfortunately, I don't have access to Ritva. I do own Ritva on Yevamos, but I'm not sure where it is. Now he writes me, "Oh, shekidei sheyidcha essay es halodas af lechachamim sarach shetia smichus mufnes o muchrach." He said there's another reason why, in the Ritva's understanding, even the chacham will require, in this case of smuchin and yibum, a mufnes situation, because otherwise it contradicts the principle of overriding a losas, meaning it's establishing the power of an essay to override a losas. And if not for smuchin, I would never know that the essay should override a losas. Now, if it's coming to establish such a radical breakthrough and a contradiction to the general rule of losas, meaning that you don't violate losas even for the sense, then for that I need some very strong support for that smuchim. It's got to be obvious. Okay. Now at this point, we want to discuss Rabbi Yehuda. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda denies smichus in general, with the exception of Mishnah? So we're now at Daf Daled Amud Aleph. We started this sugya yesterday, and we'll see if we can get more into it today. Ubi Alma, which is line 10, I believe. The Alma Lo Darsh, Mishnah Torah Darsh. The Alma Minol, there it is, line 11, I guess. I didn't count. Ubi Alma Minolan to Lo Darsh. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda in the other 4 books of Moses does not accept smucha? Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. And Azay Omer. We're now trying to derive the conclusion that a machashev is chayev skila. So Ben Azai says the following: Nemar machashev lo sechayev. We don't know exactly which misa we have to meet out to machashev. And Nemar, and in the very next pasuk, it says Kol shochev in behema mos yumas. So Ben Azai says that we could figure out what death to mete out to a shochev in behema, then we would know, if so facto, what death to mete out to machshefa samchu inyan lo. The smichas haparshiyos here between machashefa and shochev behema is to tell me which punishment we mete out. Now we've talked about amazing. Shochev behema b'skila, af machashefa b'skila. Now, how do we know that a shochev behema is b'skila? So as we mentioned yesterday, we repeat, the Torah says in Vayikra Perek Chaf, Isha asher tikra vel kol behema l'ravah also. V'haragda es ha'isha v'es ha'behema mos yumas d'meim bam. And we have a derivation that whenever it says d'meim, it means skila. Yes, you could say maybe. I mean, we'd have to know more about Masechet Sanhedrin, but that skila is the bloodiest. You get, the bloodiest of all deaths of the four mises bezin. Bottom line is that a shochev behema is equated to an isha liravia, and as a result, since we have a smichus to machashefelos chaya, we will assume that just like shochev behema gets skila, so too a machashefa gets skila. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to deny and reject this drasha ben Azai because he holds that the Alma, we don't darshan smuchim. Because the antidote to smuchim is ein mukdam u'ucha b'torah. There's no definite sequence. Amal Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says to Ben Azai, "V'chi mipnei shesamchu inyan zeh notzi zel eskila." Because the smichas parshios, we're going to be machmir, and we're going to take the machashev and stone him. Now, we have to know that skila amongst the four, on the hierarchy of the four mises bezin, is on the top of the list. It's the most severe death. Maybe you could say the other deaths are instantaneous. I don't know. But skila is the most chamura shebemises bezin. So how are you going to derive, says Rabbi Yehuda, from a smichas haparshios that we're going to meet out to the machashik the misa chamura shebe misas? The impression you get here, by the way, is that Rabbi Yehuda might accept smuchim, but not in this case where you're going to derive a mitzvah chamura. To derive a mitzvah chamura from smuchim, you better have, Rabbi Yehuda says, you better have a better, more powerful derivation than just smuchim. If you want to derive that the machashef is chayav misa chamura, meaning skila. Ella, therefore, drop it on smichas haparshas. We're not going to derive the misa of skila in the case of machashefa from smichas haparshas, but rather we're going to look at one case of machashev where the Torah reveals to us what the misa is, and we're going to extrapolate from that one case that any machashev in any form of kishuv is going to be chayiv that same misa. And that's called ov vidoni. Ella, but rather, says Rabbi Yehuda, you want to derive the misa of a machashik derived from ov vidoni, because ov vidoni mechlal mechashrim hayu. Ov vidoni is one case in point of a machashik. And therefore, we didn't need the entire parsha of Ovi Doni. If the Torah just would have said in a generic sense, Mechashef lo Sachaya, we would have applied that to Ovi Doni, because they're also Mechash. The Lama Yatsu, why did the Torah give us a separate parsha for Ovi Doni? And this is Vayikra Perek Chav, Pasuk Chav Zayin. The ish o isha ki yebahem ov o yidoni most you masu, but even yirgavu osam tveim pam. So why did the Torah have to go out of its way with a separate parsha to teach me about skila in the case of Ovi Doni, as the pasuk says, "But Evan Yirgamu Osam today," when Ovi Doni are no more than subcategories of Machashefa or Machshev. The answer is the extra parsha of Ovidoni, says Rabbi Yehuda, is lahakish lahem, to shed a light on all other machashvim. Lo malacha, to tell you ma Ovidoni b'skila af kol machashefa b'skila. So it seems that there were two options, two possible derivations to derive that machashefa is chayiv skila. Machashefa is chayiv. It was either smuchin, because it's written right before the pasuk of Shochev and Behema, or based on a hekesh. Now again, we're reflecting what we saw earlier today, that hekesh is stronger than smuchin, and we see it here in Rabbi Yehuda. Although, to be honest with you, the Gemara seems to assume that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is no such thing as smuchin, which is not the impression you get from the price of the Chaneshus. Rabbi Yehuda has a better derivation, on the hierarchy, a superior derivation in a hekesh. That's why he's telling Ben Azai, drop the ball on this smuchim business. But it doesn't mean that Rabbi Yehuda completely rejects smuchim. And the nafkamina might be the case of Kilayim B'tzitzis. Well, Kilayim B'tzitzis is also in Sefer Devarim. I'm not sure. So the Gemara now asks the following kasha. Mishnah Torah Minola, and how do you know did Darish, even Rabbi Yehuda accepts smuchim? And the Gemara answers this nan. We have a Mishnah. No say Adam anusas aviv umefutas aviv, meaning you're not allowed to marry the wife of your father, but as far as a woman who had an intimate relationship with your father, but it wasn't within the framework of issues of marriage, it was either a case of onus or pitui, is then there's no iser of h's aviv. So the Torah prohibits h's achiv in the parsha Achri Mos Kedoshim, Ervas Eishes Avicha Lo Sigale. But the word Eishes Avicha indicates Ishus. Ishus means it was Chuppah v'Kiddushin. But here, the father didn't have Kiddushin with this woman, he just had a relationship with her. And the same halacha will apply to anusas bino umefutas bino. So you're not allowed to marry kaloso, ervas kalos chalos segala. But if this woman was not married to your son, there was no kiddushin, no valid kiddushin, that's not like ervas kaloscha, because kaloscha means that she was married to your son. So the word kala refers to a woman that had an ishus relationship after kiddushin with your son. But if your son had a relationship out of wedlock with a woman, then she's not considered ervas kalos. So all this is according to the Tanakh of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ba'nusas aviv u'mefutas aviv oser, even though it's not considered Eishes Avich. The Omer of Gidol Marav, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, Why is Anusas Aviv Asura? After all, she's not included in Eshes Avicha. Dichsiv Lo Yikach Ish Es Eshes Aviv Lo Yigalek Knaf Aviv Knaf Shira Aviv Lo Yigalek. So far, I don't see a word here about smuchim. I see that the Tanakama holds that since the Torah prohibits HS or kaloso, that doesn't apply to anusa or mafut. And Rabbi Yehuda prohibits anusa or mafuta because the Torah went out of its way to include anusa by adding these four words: lo yigala knaf aviv, knaf shira aviv, lo yigala. So again, we're trying to prove that Rabbi Yehuda darshan in Mishnah Torah. And so far, all I see is that Rabbi Yehuda holds Hanusas Aviv is awesome, based on the pasuk Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv. But the answer has to be that how does Rabbi Yehuda know that Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv is a reference to and should be interpreted as Hanusas Aviv? That's where the smichus comes in. How do we know that Knaf Aviv is Banusa Ksiv? Mi iloye mi ilave dekra. As we look at the pasuk that came before this pasuk. So once again, we're in Dvarim Perek Chav Gimel, and we're learning pasuk Aleph below Yigal Knaf Aviv. Now we're going to go to the end of chapter 22. Umimai de Knaf Ova Nusaksiv Meiluye Dekra Ichsiv in Perek Chav Beis, at the end of Perek Chav Beis, with regard to an Ones Es Absula, it says V'nasan ha'isha shochevi ma lavia naroch hamishim kasa. So this is a case of Ones Es Absula. He has to pay Chamishim Kesef Knas to Avia Naro, if she's a Naro. Esamach lo yikach ish es eshes aviv lo yigal knaf aviv. So just like in the case of the previous pasuk at the end of Perek Beis, when we talk about Ashol Chevima, we're referring to an anusa. Therefore, the immediate next parsha, which is next Perek, and that's Gilui Knaf Aviv, it's also a case of an anusa. So you see that even Rabbi Yehuda, who doesn't accept smuchim in general, as we saw when he rejects Ben Azai, but he does darshan smuchim in Mishnah Torah. So again, Rabbi Yehuda rejects Ben Azai as to how do we know, from whence do we derive the machshefas b'skila? And the reason why Rabbi Yehuda rejects Menazeh is because that's the case of Shmos, Sefer Shmos, and he's unwilling, Rabbi Yehuda, to accept Smuchim in Sefer Shmos. But with regard to the Isser of, according to Rabbi Yehuda, which the Chacham rejected, but the Isser of Anusas Aviv and Futas Aviv, here Rabbi Yehuda relies on Smuchim. And how do we see that it relies on Smuchim? Because Rabbi Gidel, in the name of Rav, says, "My time to Rabbi Yehuda, Ichsiv lo yikach ishes eshes aviv lo yigala knaf aviv." The extra words lo yigala knaf aviv are interpreted as knaf shera aviv. But how do you know that lo yigala knaf aviv is a knaf shera aviv? And the answer is because the previous pasuk at the end of the previous parak is v'nasana isha shochevi mola v'yanara chamishim kasev, and that's a case of ones. And v'samachle immediately following is lo yikach ish v'lo yigal knaf of. So again, the source of skila, let's go back to this, in Shochev and Behema, is from Isha Nirvas, where the Torah says, Utmehem Bum. And Utmehem Bum means skila. And that's in Vayikra Perek Chof, Isha Shatikra Vel Kol Behema, L'Rov Osa, Baraktus Isha Sebehema, most you must Mehem Bum. And that means skila. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin derives that Tmeim Bam means skila because in the parsha of Ovi Doni, it says Yirgamu Osam Dmeim Bam. So the words Dmeim Bam are in the same pasuk as Yirgamu Osam. To teach me that Dmeim Bam always refers to the misa of skila. Hikshu Achronim, this is at the bottom of page Chaf Daled. So mi Lashon HaGemara mashma shemedubar be'isha shochev im behema, lo be'isha. Be'eves Sanhedrin muvur she'isha shochev im behema onsho b'skila, milban migzer shava, tahargu. V'harug tehargenu. That's the parsha of Masechet. Now in Masechet, the Torah says explicitly that his punishment is skila. And shochev behema is there's exeris shavet to Masechet. In both cases, it says targu. Therefore, shochev behema is chayav skila. Rashi says that the reason why Shochev Behema is Chayav Skila is because of Tmeim Bam, which is a derivation from Ovi Doni. But the Gemara seems to assume that Shochev Behema is derived, from Xeris Shabbat to Mesis. Now, Kol Shochev Behema sounds like we're talking about a male, not a female. In the case of the female, Isha, Asher Tikrav, etc., L'Rav Osam, there it says, Mos Yum Sud Tmeim Bam. So in a sense, Rashi, by establishing skila in the case of Shochev Behema, based on the halacha, based on the principle of Tmeim Bam, it's not really accurate because that Tmeim Bam is not the source from which we derive that Shochem Behem is Chayiv Skila. Yes, a woman who has a revere with a behema, she's going to be Chayiv Skila based on Tmei and Bam. But if you're asking about a Shochem and Behema, which is Ben Azai's pasuk, I mean, he sets up a Smichas HaParshios between Shochem and Behema and Machshefel Osachaya. That's referring not to the woman who has a relationship with an animal, but a man. And Rashi therefore should not have quoted the halach of Tmei and Bam, which refers to an Isha, but rather Xer Shava between Shochem and Behema and Maces, which the Gemara establishes in Sanhedrin and Dalet Beis as a Xer Shava to teach me that just like Maces is Chayiv Skila, so too Shochem and Behema is Chayiv Skila. Instead, Rashi quotes the halach of Tmei and Bam. But Tmei and Bam is only a reference to Isha HaNirvas, not to an Isha Shochem and Behema. So that's a kasha that we have here in Rashi. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, how do we know that a Shochem Behema is Chayev Skila? We know it from Ovidon. So it comes out that we don't need the drasha of Tmei and Bam, which Rashi quotes over here. So here on page of Hey, which we'll do another time, he says, Lama nichtav Tmei and Bam al liba de Rabbi Yehuda. We don't need the Tmei and Bam in the parsha of Shochem Behema, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to derive the Chiv Skila second. We just get the calculation here. Rabbi Yehuda also Machshefa is derived from Ovidoni. It is a Chiv Skila. Ben Azai is going to derive the same conclusion of the Chiv Skila and Machshefa from Smichas HaParshios to Shochem Behema. And Rashi says that Shochem Behema is derived from Tmei and Bam. So why do I need Tmei and Bam? If I don't have the drasha Rabbi Yehuda to equate Ovidoni with all Machshefa and derive Skila, so then I understand I have to derive Skila from a Smichas HaParshios to Shochem in Behema. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who derives what? He derives Skila in the case of Machashefa from the Hekesh to Ovidoni. So why do I need this drasha of Tmei and Bam? That every Tmei and Bam is the Skila. And it says by Shochem Behema, actually by the case of Isha Berevia, it says Tmei and Bam. Why did the Torah have to tell me Tmei and Bam according to Rabbi Yehuda? It seems totally superfluous, because even if the Torah had not said Tmei and Bam, we would understand that Shochem Behema is Chayev Skila. Again, we have a smichus aparshios between machshefa and shochim and behem. That was Ben Azza. And in shochim and behema, the Torah says dmeim bon to teach you skila. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's unnecessary because we can derive the chiyuv skila and machshefa from ovidonim. Now, it says, Mikan mochicha gemara. We'll finish this up real quickly. So Rabbi Yehuda lo dorish smuchim b'chol Torah. The kasha minayin she'eno dorish smuchim b'chol Torah. Ulai kan dafka eno dorish smuchim mishum. So that's enough. That's a sugi we didn't get to yet. 1 second. All right. So again, we'll have to figure out what Rabbi Yehuda does with Tmei and Bon. That seems to be a very Here's Hashem for tomorrow. What I'd like to do is I want to finish this Gemara here on Daf Daled Omen Aleph about Smichas HaParshiyot and try to figure out how we know that Rabbi Yehuda darshan Smuchin in Mishnah Torah, although he rejects Smuchin in Kol Torah. As far as why that distinction is made, we have a long discussion here with the Ramban and the Ramban, the Ritva, as we mentioned earlier. Just make a note of where we got up to. Okay, that's that. Good.